me know if you can see and hear me.
I can see and hear you, Dr. Long. How are you today, Pamela?
Great, Kevin. Thank you so much. I really appreciated what everybody is sharing, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts here. Hopefully, I can get through them all.
Well, fantastic. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and hit share mode, and then just let me know when you'd like me to advance the slides, please. But before we get started, let me digress for a moment because I'd sure like to inform our audience as to Dr. Long, your background and credentials in this area, because I know this is going to be a real tour de force for us. Uh, Pamela Denise Long is Principal Project Manager and Implementation Consultant at Youth Centrics. Denise holds an EDD in Organizational Development, MS in Learning and Cognition, and BHS in Allied Health. Her specialty is knowledge translation, mobilization, management in equity-focused public policy, and organizational initiatives. Dr. Long is an award-winning business consultant for implementing trauma-informed diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. A seventh-generation American and media personality featured at Newsweek, Fox News, WVON, the Griot Politics, Black News Channel, and many more. Dr. Long, again, welcome and looking forward to your presentation.
Fantastic.
Oh, but we do have something in chat from someone.
That's from
Uh,
me. I'm just
oh,
sharing some resources with people as we
oh,
go.
fantastic. Here we go. Let me go ahead and go back into our presentation. I'm going to forward this to, and then I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. If I show webinar and mute and go.
Fantastic. So the topic I'm discussing today is about native-born labor sourcing and talent management plan. It originated from two artifacts, an article I wrote for Newsweek titled Mr. President, Americans Don't Need Good Vibes, We Need an America's First Agenda. That is what the link is in your chat box. And then a white paper, if you will, that I wrote called The 3-Point Plan to Unite America. You can advance the slide. So in our time together, I plan to accomplish three things. One, upend the accusation that it is racist to design a native-born labor sourcing strategy, identify a few key judicial decisions and legislative actions that are already on the books that can help make, not let, but make internal talent management happen. And I'll share some written resources along the way in the chat box. Next slide, please. Kevin, I can't see you because I'm speaking, so I'm just gonna go off of the thing. So ultimately, this conversation about mass immigration and the workforce for semiconductor manufacturing begs the question about the impacts of a loose labor market. A loose labor market, meaning too much competition, replaces American workers with alternative sources of labor via mass legal immigration, mass illegal immigration, and outsourcing, as Brian's report made clear. The current border crisis further proves that mass illegal immigration is not just about people who are farm workers and so-called low-skill, low-wage jobs. For some estimates, we've admitted nearly 10 million border crossers of various educational backgrounds and skill levels into the nation since 2021. How many of those new arrivals will compete for jobs related to semiconductor manufacturing? Next slide, please. What image comes to mind for you when I say tech worker? So the image that comes to mind for you not just because you are racist, but there's a particular image that comes to mind for you, a particular look, because you're paying attention to the trends that Brian, as well as the previous speaker, Steve, just illuminated. So what I've heard someone cleverly say is that if the classic film Jurassic Park was made today, Samuel L. Jackson would likely not be the lead software engineer. He would not be the image that popped into your mind when I say tech worker or software engineer. And it's not because Americans won't do the work, won't function in STEM careers, aren't interested in technology. When you take inventory, it's because they have been replaced. And when you take inventory of the semiconductor manufacturing process, which you should be able to see on your screen, you cannot see that on your screen right now. What I would ask you is, of those tasks, you can advance, Kevin. When we think about the job tasks that relate to semiconducting, semiconductor manufacturing, there are tasks across the span of careers. There's welding, there's sand collection, there's all the processes related to transportation, there's driving. There are many jobs that Americans would do to participate in the semiconductor manufacturing needs of our nation. And so it's no coincidence that in this period of mass legal and illegal immigration, some business interests and political interests are now promising to remove barriers to career entry, where Americans, as Steve highlighted, have been forced to purchase a bachelor's degree, master's preferred, to gain even entry-level skill development. And so let's talk about the moral obligation that the United States has to ensure that Americans are served by our economy. So a Forbes 2024 Forbes advisory survey revealed that across generations, 20 to 32% of Americans have less than $1,000 saved. 2/3 of survey respondents in 2024 said that their low savings was due to high costs of living. 1/3 noted that debt obligations affected their ability to save. And as the previous speakers shared, and other speakers today will confirm, the United States has stumbled in ensuring that the labor needs of the nation are met by American workers first and foremost. And so for me, Americans First is about the people. As Senator Tom Cotton correctly noted, America is not just an economy with a country, it is a country with an economy. And that country is just a place without the prosperity and security of its people, Americans. So Americans First means that the U.S. public policy for labor sourcing includes a plan to facilitate the economic stability and maximum human development of America's working age adults and the communities and families that depend upon us. This includes the actively participating workforce, those who are counted in the labor force participation rate, which as of August 2024, the St. Louis Fed Reserve reports is 62.7% of Americans. The Americans First accounts for future workers, so the talent pipeline of college professionals, tradesmen, and service workers. And it also accounts for the displaced or disaffected Americans who want a job but can't find one for fair wages and satisfactory work conditions. Americans First means that we honor and, when needed, modify trade agreements that require acceptance of foreign workers into U.S. labor market or require outsourcing of jobs to other countries. Americans First means that our nation uses foreign labor as a supplemental labor source of last resort after ensuring that every working aged American has an opportunity, ample access points to enter the job market, clearly laid out on-ramps to receive training, job recruitment, job retention, and or business funding to fulfill the current workforce needs and thrive in meeting demands for emerging technology. America's First means we do away with the idea that legal mass immigration is good, illegal is bad, and we challenge those who think that fixing the immigration system means welcoming mass legal immigration and mass illegal immigration. So, what we know is that there is ample legal precedents to legally put Americans first. So let's cover some of those precedents in the remaining time that I have. If the data from this panel is true, it stands to reason that there is a potential 14th Amendment equal protections argument against the whole of government approach that the United States has taken to ensure that foreign graduates and workers receive resources and wraparound services that American citizens do not receive. That violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protections Clause is particularly a cause of action when current citizens and legacy groups like the Black Americans, descendants of US slaves, and survivors of Jim Crow are not afforded the same red carpet that new arrivals and outsourcing immigrants and the like are provided. In fact, the June 2023 Supreme Court argument or a ruling about affirmative action, two of the conservative justices made it very clear that Black Americans, descendants of US slaves and free Negroes, are protected by injured class status, not race. So that affirmative action decision itself lends itself toward tailoring an American labor sourcing plan that prioritizes citizens who've been discriminated against. Those justices were clear that the interclass protections of Black Americans do not apply to all Black people. So it doesn't apply to Black immigrants, for example, who are often who often are seen in hiring as well as recruitment for education, the positions that we're talking about here. So there's no delineation in who's receiving those admissions to colleges. In the final ruling, for example, Chief Justice Roberts wrote, "Nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities and governments from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise." But Justice Thomas, in his concurrent opinion, went on to state that even today, nothing prevents the states from according an admissions preference, they were talking about colleges, to identified victims of discrimination. In his concurrence, Justice Thomas provides examples of US case law that show that programs, like hiring programs, that redress the impacts of previous discrimination, like educational, amplifying the education needs for Americans, have passed strict scrutiny when multi-generational Black Americans benefited most or even exclusively. So my challenge today for those who are listening, who are elected officials, activists, and advocates and the like is, how can we apply that SCOTUS ruling to put Americans first in hiring, given the data, ample data, that shows in many ways our needs have been placed secondary to business interest? So one of the things that Project 2025 got right, moving forward with recommendations, is to increase the funding to HBCUs. I was shocked to learn at the 2023 White House HBCU Conference Week that the government has prioritized exporting education and has taken a whole of government approach to help colleges internationalize their campus. I'm in the process of completing a deep dive into researching that angle, the full funding of HBCUs and a whole of government approach to ensuring a native-born talent management pipeline. So that white paper and research paper will be out soon. talking about how we can serve the semiconductor manufacturing and other STEM needs through conscious choice. Another legal precedent that can be used is the Local Public Works Capital Development and Investment Act of 1976. As originally written, this law prioritized citizen populations with whom the US government has special relationships due to historical practices of discrimination. 42 USC Chapter 80, Subchapter 1 states the following about local public works. Except to the extent that the Secretary determines otherwise, no grant made under public works shall be made under this chapter for any local public works projects unless the applicant gives satisfactory assurance to the Secretary that at least 10% of the amount of each grant shall be expended for minority business enterprises. For purposes of this paragraph, the term minority business enterprise means a business of at least 50% of ownership by a minority group. And the minority groups mentioned in 1976 were Negroes, Spanish-speaking, Orientals, Indian, Eskimos, and Aleutians. So in 2016, language modernization legislation actually blew the hinges off of this lineage specific discriminatory redress of discriminatory actions legislation. And it changed wording to include practically any new arrival who arrives to the United States. It changed Negro to African American. And you've already heard the language about who is an African American nowadays, even though we know that the same people, American Negroes, the founding Black population, are African American, Asian American, which means everybody, Pacific Islanders, Hispanic, Native American, and the like. The United States owes no such special dispensations to the entirety of the world. That 1976 legislation can indeed, in companionship with the 2023 SCOTUS ruling, be used to once again serve those populations who've been underserved and displaced by outsourcing and the like. One other legal precedent is the 1970 National Environmental Policy Act and the Environmental Justice Executive Orders by Bill Clinton and Joseph Biden. Those acts, the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, is designed to ensure that the federal government submits major proposed federal actions to an analysis of negative impacts and that on the human environment, and not just trees and rocks and all the things, but the economics and the relationships and the politics and the like, and to mitigate those negative impacts, as well as collecting impact statements from affected communities. So what Steve shared very personally here, the government would seek to solicit those types of perspectives and ideally do something to minimize a repetition of that behavior. I'm not exactly sure how much time I have left, Kevin, so I'll just keep going.
Probably, so about another minute.
Perfect. That's what I thought.
Dr. Long,
Okay.
thank you.
And finally, we must address common self-management and mental health related concerns that Americans have that might keep them out of the labor force, as well as make them struggle to maintain stable employment. Specifically, what I'm talking about here is what you often hear about: adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and adversity. You might ask yourself, what does that have to do with labor sourcing? But what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention identified in the late 90s is that there are many ways that adversity from birth to 17 actually affect life performance. And here are two ways that adversity affects worker performance. Those adults who have an adverse childhood experiences score of 4 or more are more likely to be absent greater than 2 days per month. They are also much more likely, 20% more likely, to actually have serious problems performing their job, including accepting feedback, showing up to work on time, showing up to work and not smelling like a substance that they may abuse or use to self-medicate. So I hope you leave this session with me, understanding that elected officials can and already have legal precedents on the books to help them develop a labor sourcing plan that puts Americans first. And that last, but certainly not least, I'm calling each of us to remember that what gets measured gets done, what gets planned gets implemented, and to prioritize a native born labor sourcing plan and internal talent management strategy. Elected officials and American citizens must reconcile the need for some level of central planning, impacts assessments, and timely course corrections. Otherwise, we get what we get, and how's that working out for us? Thank you.
Wow, it's not working out very well for us, Dr. Long.